Chapter 1. The Ghost Protocol. The Termination Meeting. The termination meeting lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Marcus Green counted every second on the wall clock behind Brad Tillman's head. The clock was a cheap plastic thing that had hung in the break room since the startup was just 3 guys in a WeWork. Now they had a real office with glass walls and a view of the Atlanta skyline, and Brad had a real attorney sitting next to him. "Effective immediately," Brad said, sliding a manila folder across the polished concrete table. "Your shares are unvested. The board voted this morning. It's unanimous." Marcus did not touch the folder. He did not look at the attorney. He looked at Brad's collar. There was a faint smudge of lipstick there. It was the shade of rebel red that Marcus had bought for his wife, Vanessa, just 2 weeks ago for her birthday. He understood everything in that moment. The cold distance from Vanessa. The sudden executive coaching sessions Brad claimed were happening after hours. The way Vanessa had suddenly become an expert on vesting cliffs and equity dilution over dinner. He was being erased, not just from the company but from the life he had built. He was the black architect of the system, and they were whitewashing the origin story in real time. Marcus stood up. He was 6'3", and his frame filled the glass doorway. "All right," he said. That was all he said. Brad looked disappointed. He had been expecting a scene, a lawsuit threat, perhaps even a fistfight that he could use for a restraining order. But Marcus just walked out, past the ping-pong table he had assembled, past the whiteboard where his handwriting still detailed the API structure. He was a ghost now. And ghosts, as anyone who understands code will tell you, have a way of haunting systems. Chapter 2. The Weight of Invisible Architecture. The days that followed were a study in quiet devastation. Marcus sat in his new apartment, a 1-bedroom in Decatur that smelled faintly of the previous tenant's curry, and assessed the damage. He had no job. His savings were tied up in a house he could no longer enter because Vanessa had changed the locks. His reputation in the Atlanta tech scene was being quietly dismantled by Brad's PR machine, which whispered about burnout and a lack of cultural fit. But Marcus had something Brad and Vanessa did not understand. He had root access. Not to the company's user accounts or financial ledgers. Those had been locked down immediately. He had access to the plumbing, the invisible layer of the application that handled data integrity. 3 years ago, when EtherStack was just a messy codebase and a dream, Marcus had been paranoid. He had watched a documentary about the 2008 financial crisis and how a single spreadsheet error had nearly destroyed the global economy. He was determined that his software would never suffer from a fat finger error that corrupted the database. So he wrote a piece of software he called the Mirror. The Mirror was a silent replication protocol. It lived in the background, taking a microscopic snapshot of every transaction that passed through EtherStack's payment gateway. It didn't copy customer names or credit card numbers. It only copied 3 things: timestamp, transaction amount, and fee calculation. It stored this data in a cheap, cold storage cloud bucket that cost pennies a month to maintain. Marcus had set it up using his personal alumni email address from Morehouse College. He had forgotten about it. It was like a spare key hidden under a digital rock. Sitting in his empty apartment, he remembered the key. Chapter 3. The Arithmetic of Justice. Marcus logged into the old cloud console. The bucket was still there. It had been quietly collecting data for 1,093 days. He ran a simple query. He asked the system to show him every instance where the fee calculation applied to a transaction had a rounding discrepancy greater than 0.00001 cents. The list was millions of lines long. Here is what Marcus understood better than Brad or the VC board. Computers are bad at fractions of pennies. When you charge a 2.9% fee on a transaction of 1051, the math produces a number that stretches out to 15 decimal places. The system is programmed to round, usually up, sometimes down. Over millions of transactions, these rounding fragments add up. Because of the Mirror, Marcus had a perfect independent ledger of every rounding fragment EtherStack had collected over 3 years. And because Brad had fired the only engineer who knew how to audit the fee reconciliation reports, no one had noticed a growing discrepancy in the company's unallocated revenue account. It was a slush fund of pure digital dust. The total, according to the Mirror's precise calculation, was $3,212,447.18. Marcus didn't need to steal the money. He needed to expose the existence of the money. He needed to show the world, and specifically the investors, that Brad Tillman was running a company with a $3.2 million accounting ghost that he couldn't explain. Chapter 4. The quietest press release in history. Marcus spent the next 3 weeks preparing a document. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was an audit. He used his access to the Mirror's logs to create a perfect, unassailable spreadsheet. He cross-referenced it with the company's publicly stated revenue figures from press releases and Brad's podcast interviews. The discrepancy was undeniable. Brad had been telling the world the company was making $50 million ARR. The Mirror proved the actual processed volume was significantly higher, meaning the company was either hiding revenue or grossly incompetent in its financial reporting. The day Brad and Vanessa appeared on the cover of Atlanta Business Chronicle under the headline, "Tech's New Power Couple," Marcus sent a single email. He sent it to the compliance officer at the venture capital firm that led EtherStack's Series A. The subject line was, "Re-due diligence anomaly, EtherStack fee reconciliation, ITN, SEC compliance." He attached the spreadsheet. He attached a link to a read-only view of the Mirror's dashboard. He signed the email. "Best regards, Marcus Green, former lead architect, EtherStack, Morehouse College, class of 2014. Chapter 5. The Karma of Rounding Errors. The reaction was not loud. It was surgical. The VC firm's legal team had a fiduciary duty to investigate any claim that could affect the valuation of their investment. Within 48 hours, a forensic accounting team was inside EtherStack's offices. Brad was pulled out of a lunch meeting with Vanessa. She was left sitting alone at the table, her champagne flute half empty, her phone buzzing with frantic texts from their PR manager. The accountants found the discrepancy. They found the Mirror's log was more accurate than Brad's internal reports. They couldn't fire Marcus because he didn't work there anymore. They couldn't sue him because he hadn't taken a single cent of the $3.2 million. He had simply pointed at it. The $3.2 million was classified as a revenue recognition error. The company had to restate its earnings. Brad was removed as CEO for governance failures. Vanessa, whose entire social standing was built on being the wife of a CEO, found herself in a rapidly cooling marriage with a man who was now just a consultant with tarnished equity. And the money? The $3.2 million in unallocated fees? The VC firm, eager to avoid an SEC fine and desperate for good PR after the bad press, decided to settle the matter by donating the entire amount to a charitable fund focused on financial literacy for minority students. The fund was named the Green Initiative. Marcus Green did not attend the press conference. He was at his new job, a quiet but stable role as a systems engineer for the city of Atlanta. But when he drove home that evening, he passed the electronic billboard on I-85. It read, "The Green Initiative, 3.2 matters for Atlanta's future, because the numbers don't lie." He allowed himself a small, private smile. The ghost had finally been acknowledged. And this time, it was the ones who had tried to erase him who found themselves fading into the static of their own miscalculations.